Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. We are starting our webinar focused on culvert replacement techniques. This webinar is organized by the World Fish Migration Foundation and funded by the US Forest Service. Today with me, I will have experts from Europe and also the United States sharing their knowledge on culvert replacement techniques. We will have two sessions webinar starting with the US experts Mark Weinhold and Erica Borum sharing their expertise on technical approaches and challenges in culvert replacement. And in the second session, we will have European experts sharing their knowledge. We will have Nicolas Mayon from the Nature Park Haute-Sûre Forêt in Belgium, Magda Jentgena from WWF Latvia, and Sofia Perä from Country Administrative Board of the Norrbotten in Sweden. We will start the webinar with the presentation from Mark. He has 35 years experience on hydraulical engineering, hydrology, and works for the US Forest Service National Stream and Aquatic Ecology Center in Colorado, USA. He works both across the United States and internationally, providing technical assistance on interaction of water, climate, and land use on vulnerable infrastructure. He's one of the developers of stream simulation. The agency designs a methodology for providing aquatic organisms passage and transportation system resilience at the road stream crossing. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do this morning or afternoon is give you an overview of what the United States Forest Service does at road stream crossings and ultimately how we arrived at that solution and the solution that we consider a nature-based solution for road stream crossings. And I think to establish a little bit of credibility, some of you may not know about the United States Forest Service, that we are a government agency and we manage public land and about 80 million hectares of public land. So it's a diversity of uses, most of which, or perhaps all of which, require a road access. Outdoor recreation is enormous on these public lands. Everything from firefighting, the use of fire to manage ecosystems, grazing, timber production. About every land use you can imagine occurs on national forests, and both those uses and our management of it requires roads. So not only are we unique in being one of the largest land management agencies on the planet, we're also one of the largest road management agencies. So 600,000 kilometers is what our road network looks like. And to put that in perspective, that's like 15 times around a planet. So there are significant benefits that come from that system, but significant impacts as well. And the one that we want to focus on is these ideas of where roads and streams cross. And 65,000 of those crossings have been a focus for us, because that's where we have narrowed down our initial focus to look at aquatic passage for aquatic organisms. But ultimately, we have almost 500,000 crossings that we have issues with, because almost every crossing out there is undersized by current day standards, which means with a changing climate, we have some resiliency issues that we need to think about. And our road system is remote. There are not large amounts of traffic every day driving on these to keep track of maintenance needs and such. They're in far-flung places. And what we find is failures happen on a fairly regular basis. And I can't guarantee many things, but I don't think I'd want to be that last set of tracks on this road. With that transportation resiliency issue, we have made the observation over 70 years that we've got a biological resiliency problem too, because this is a very common scenario where you've got a velocity barrier for fish that you can see sitting at the outlet of this pipe. Often it's a depth barrier as well, and for many it can be a jump barrier. And so where we found ourselves decades ago is we've spent a lot of money on this high value road infrastructure. It cuts across what is very high value aquatic ecosystems, and we have this dismal connection between the two. And where we find ourselves is asking a couple questions. The first one, is that a meaningful ecological transition? And I think we know the answer to that. It's not. And then from the engineering side, is this really a floodworthy engineering tool? And again, the answer to that is no. So it's caused us to rethink where we're going and how to get there. And we have changed the way we do business at Road Stream Crossings significantly in the last 20 years. And I would like to say that is because as a culture, as an agency, that we saw the light and knew that we were doing things poorly, but it actually took lawsuits. We have in the United States the Endangered Species Act, and we had a number of aquatic species that were challenged, and our road stream crossings were a significant part of that. And so as we evaluated our road system's role in the recovery of these species, we came up with what I would consider to be a few, let's call them embarrassingly simple principles that we need to abide by. And one is that, this simple realization that stream corridors are highways too. We don't often think about it that way, but that's simply because as engineers, we never actually invited biologists and ecologists to the table, but they will tell you this straight up. And it's true. And you can look at an aerial view of the Western United States in the dry season, and you can see the extent of that stream network in green. It's significant. And you can also see through the middle of that image, that white road that goes across it. And it actually crosses that stream system with one road about 8 times over the course of 2 or 3 kilometers. That has significant impacts to the animals that live there. And I will say that over time, we've done okay at dealing with these big charismatic fish species, here the Pacific salmon. They are strong swimmers and jumpers. They can move past a lot of things. That was our design challenge at the time. But when you start to look around just a little bit, you'll find fish like the Iowa darter that we don't know how they move, we don't know why they move, and we don't know when they move. So it's very difficult to do our traditional hydraulic design to accommodate these species. That realization was really significant for us to determine a path forward. When you look even further, you find that we have fish that we don't even think are fish, Pacific lamprey, that move in ways that we don't fathom very well. It's not just about fish. On national forest lands, we manage over 210 different types of amphibians, all of which move up and down these corridors. Who knew that there were 346 different kinds of crayfish, primarily in the southeastern part of the United States? So the assemblage of species that we're trying to accommodate is really big. And you can look at this map of the United States, and those darker colors in blues and greens represent aquatic biodiversity. So the right-hand side of our country is incredibly diverse, which means now that that's where a lot of our threatened and endangered species are. And what we're finding is that even if our roads are not a direct cause or the direct cause of these endangered species listings, they can certainly prevent the recovery of these species. And it's critically important when we look at this freshwater biodiversity across the entire planet that portions of our country, especially in the Southeast, are some of the biodiversity hotspots for the entire planet. So another principle that isn't so much biologically related, but more about our transportation system is what we found is the best way to predict if your road is going to fail is how close it is to water. And we have done some very silly things over the course of developing our transportation system where the easiest place to build a road was right along a river. That puts you in harm's way right off the bat. And so we have a saying that we like to think about now is what's good for the road, or what's good for the river is good for the road, which typically means giving it space. And if you take an honest look at your transportation system, what you're going to find is where roads and stream cross, that's really ground zero for where impacts occur, because that's where roads and flowing water interact every day, all day. So during the storms, this is where we find, with any kind of honest evaluation, this is where we find that the impacts are targeted. Principle number 3 is getting past this idea that it's just about water, because we know that watersheds produce products that are debris, that are wood, that are sediment, all have to pass through these structures. And the way I think about it here is that it's good that culverts don't have feelings, because that would probably hurt. This is not common. You're more likely to see a plugged pipe that looks like this, where we did a lot of what we called forensic culvertology, which we looked at failures in a big way after very large floods a couple decades ago. And looking at hundreds of these failures, what we found is that pipes don't fail solely because of too much water. They fail because they lose capacity by small pieces of wood and sediment. And they might be pieces of wood the size of your arm that lodge in a corner, and then they fill in with sediment behind that. And before long, you've lost half your capacity and your pipe fails. Another principle that we've come to is that rivers play the long game. Water always wins in that scenario. And while rivers play the long game, our funding mechanisms don't. We typically are funding a first cost in the short term without thinking about how these will function over the long term and how the life cycle costs look. But we've been successful in some places. And that's only because in big rivers, we have had enough failures that we learn to stay out of the way. And we do that with big, wide bridges. However, over much of our landscape, most of our road stream crossings, they're smaller. They're not that big. And we had arrived at the conclusion decades ago that we could shove a stream into a small pipe and get away with it for a while. But eventually, that idea backfires with a big flood, and it eventually just wears out. When we're putting water and sediment and debris over the top of metal, they ultimately fail by abrasion. And this is over the course of a small number of decades. And over the, compared to a human lifespan, these are really short-lived structures. We found better ways to approach that. Another principle that's really influenced how we look at these road stream crossings is climate change. And to sum it up, climate change speaks to us through water. That's how we know it's happening. And our relationship with water and our ability to predict the amount that is coming, it's changing. And it's getting very difficult to arrive at. So this idea of leaving yourself some space is important. And as an example of that, you're looking at a map of the United States, and those numbers are actually the percent increases in the largest precipitation events that we're seeing over the last 30 years. That's significant when you're thinking about a structure that you expect to be in the ground for 50, 75, 100 years, that already your largest rainfall events are increasing by 60%. That gets quite difficult to deal with. The other piece of that is that these very large events here, 3 inches or larger, they're on a very clear increasing trend. Again, when we're talking about structures that we want to be in the ground for a long time, we have to be looking at the stream channel and seeing what we can learn from that. And this has ultimately led us to this idea of shifting paradigms. How do we think about road stream crossings differently? And for the engineers in the crowd, you'll recognize this nomograph here. This is something that we're taught fundamentally in engineering school on how to size a pipe. And it's based solely on the amount of water that you predict to be there and how deep you can pond it up at the inlet. This treats every water course like a storm drain. It ignores sediment, it ignores debris, all those other things that affect the capacity of pipe. This is a very dated way of thinking, and yet this is what our universities are still suggesting we do when we get to a road stream crossing. And the idea, again, is that you pond up water at the inlet and you can push a tremendous amount of water through an opening. So it forces you or encourages you to go to this idea of the most economical crossing, which is going to give you a design that looks like the picture over my shoulder in this image. And what it also does is it gives you a very recognizable shape over time. The water is flowing from left to right here, and when floods come to these small pipes, they pond up at the inlet. They create essentially a lake where sediment drops out. Often you'll get an island that forms, so you get a wide width at the inlet of that. Conversely, at the outlet, you have high velocities coming out of this pipe, making a big, deep swimming hole. So this hourglass shape is very characteristic of what you will find at these underground or these undersized road stream crossings, these inlet and outlet transitions. But the paradigm shift that comes with that, again, that is very recognizable once you know what to look for. But the idea that streams really have something to tell you. And what you're going to find is the width that the stream is suggesting is a good idea to follow. In our part of the world, with our climate, we've had 10 or 15,000 years from the last mini ice age. These stream channels have had a long time to determine how wide they need to be. And it's really arrogant of us as engineers to come in and offer them half of that with a pipe width. Bad things will happen, bad things have happened, and will continue to happen. And so I'm not saying I'm an avid bird observer, but you might have heard of James Audubon, who started the Audubon Society. But I think he has a real relevant quote here that when you're out looking at birds, when the bird and your book disagree, believe the bird. When it comes to road stream crossings, when your stream channel and what you're thinking about a structure or a pipe size disagree, you better believe the stream, because it will exert itself over time. And so in my view, we have to go back to our roots a little bit. And this is where the idea of nature-based solutions come in. How do we as engineers observe something in nature and copy it in a way that actually works? We can look at analogs in a natural setting, and we can come up with a design that works really well because it relies on those same natural processes to do that. We can look at a stream channel, the function of that stream channel, how it moves sediment, how it dissipates energy. We can create something like that when we need to. We're good at that, but at some point, and I don't know when it happened, we lost our way when it comes to culverts and road stream crossings. And honestly, I think it was really dictated by the availability of metal and concrete pipes at a cheap price, that they make small ones very easily. So we tended to use those. That's backfired a little bit. So where we have come from that is how do we come up with a new methodology that actually lets the stream be a stream? And again, this is where the nature-based solution comes in. We call our method stream simulation because that's exactly what we're doing. We've decided that these road stream crossings, for all the benefits involved, it's about the stream and not the lid that we put over the top of it. The lid being, is it a metal lid? Is it concrete? Is it a bridge? This is a little disappointing to us as engineers because we got to focus on that for decades. That's really not the point anymore. We're good at lids. We can do that. So the idea with stream simulation is we're basically copying what is out there. So this idea of a reference reach is really important because we're looking at the adjacent channel upstream and down, looking for a place where we can get a template to simulate that channel in the shape, in the slope, and in the bed material. The idea is this is a geomorphic design, that it is in equilibrium with the rest of that channel. It's not fixed in place. That bed goes up and down. It's dynamically sustained over a range of flows, and think about it as a mobile bed in a stable channel. This is the idea of stream simulation, and we will spend a week in a training course teaching people how to do this. A fundamental piece of information that we use on that is this longitudinal profile. So imagine you're surveying the elevation of a stream channel over distance. You will notice the accumulated sediment at the inlet. That hump in the middle there is the road stream crossing. You'll notice the big deep pool at the outlet. But what we do is we have a very specific methodology to identify what we call slope segments along this stream, individual sections of the stream at a particular gradient. Because when we redesign a crossing through here, we're going to come up with a reach to reconstruct. That's going to have a gradient, and we can then match that gradient to another section of the channel. That's the idea behind a reference reach. Once we know that, we're not the sharpest people in the world, but we can copy stuff. We can copy the cross-sectional shape. We can look at the variability of widths. What is the stream bed material? What are the sizes? What are the channel form? That's what we will reconstruct through the road. And if we had a magic Harry Potter wand, we would pick up that piece of channel and set it right in the road. We can't do that, but we can do math instead to get to that very same place. But the idea is, for that same stream bed, we can have any lid we want, any lid that fits. And here's where your economics, your durability, your traffic, and all those things come into play. That doesn't get us out of a lot of the traditional engineering pieces that we do, because we're still going to come back and look at the bed material and make sure that when bed load or stream bed material is moving in a flood outside this channel, it's moving on the inside as well. If we have key pieces like rock along the banks or key roughness elements, we're going to size those to be stable in a big flood. We'll always come back and check the hydraulic capacity of this structure. We have a criteria within the Forest Service is that during our design flood, we don't want that structure to be more than 80% full. One, we don't want to pressurize it with water over the top, because that creates really high velocities through there. But we also want to leave room for uncertainty, for debris, that sort of thing, to make sure that we're fine during those big floods. But to wrap that up, the general idea here is that this is a common scenario of before. Not a real ambitious solution here, because it's got insufficient hydraulic capacity. We know that. These are 40 years old. They plug all the time by debris, especially when you have multiple culverts that have really inefficient inlets. The culverts wear out from abrasion going over the top of it, and they're migration barriers. So our solution would be to actually span that channel, rebuild that stream channel to look like the rest of the stream, and in this case, put a lid over it that's an aluminum box. And that maintains the width continuity. That maintains the profile continuity, so your hydraulics and your flood capacity is accomplished, as well as the aquatic organism passage, because this looks exactly like the rest of the stream. So when you come out the other end of this, you have your capacity, you've minimized your debris and plugging in these big floods, you've taken away abrasion on metal surfaces, so these will last as long as that aluminum lasts, sitting up there out of harm's way, which can easily be 75 to 100 years, and you have unimpeded passage of fish and other aquatic organisms. So to wrap this up, this is way too common of occurrence for us, and we've moved past this competition between ecology and economics, which led us to this point. And now we've been able to reframe this in a longer view with life cycle costs, where we can really start talking about the benefits of this solution, and not just the first cost of it. And that's going to transition to what Erica Borum is going to talk about next, about essentially the dividend that comes from designing for resilience. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Let me see if you have questions in the Q&A. What about the minimal height under the top for wood free flow? Question from Antoine.
Could you say that again?
What about the minimal height under the top for wood free flow?
So what we do there is we have that criterion for 80%. So we don't want our pipe filling 80%. So that leaves us room for debris, which is typically smaller debris. We look at these sites when we first get there and we think about site risks. And one of those site risks is debris and the opportunity for this channel bed to change or to need more room. And that becomes a site-specific consideration that if you are concerned about debris, large debris moving down there, you actually try to maximize your fill height or your structure height to accommodate that. So there's no magic single number. That's case specific.
Thank you. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. Slipning, inserting a plastic pipe inside a failing culvert to act as a quick but temporary fix, making a bad situation many times worse. Is this still a commonly promoted engineering solution in some countries? You may answer this question regarding the situation in US and even in other countries where you have experience.
Yeah, I won't. That is definitely an engineering tool that's employed, and it's usually on major highways where it's very difficult and very expensive to do these solutions because of traffic and so on. So that is falling out of favor because, as you point out, it's a barrier to aquatic organisms every time because it's so slick and the velocities are so high. But it does buy the structure life in the short term to perhaps raise money and think about a longer term solution.
Thank you. Another question from Dan Brogan. Stream simulation address the size of the active channel. Can you speak to how you or the stream simulation takes into account shifting platforms or a multi-thread channel?
Yeah, so I mentioned site risks a minute ago, and one of those site risks is around floodplain conveyance. And if water moving in multiple channels or across a floodplain is one of the scenarios that you have to accommodate, what you would do is you still have a main channel crossing that might look like what I described, but you might have multiple structures on either side to accommodate those flood flows in what are likely well-defined floodplain channels anyway. So there's some hydraulic modeling that goes with that to move floodplain flows, but a common scenario.
Perfect, thank you. I think we have time for another question. This one is from Leslie. Do you allow for mammals passage under the road at high flows?
Mammal passage, typically what we're dealing with is small mammals, although some of these larger structures, you'll have deer and elk that can move through them. But the small mammals tend to move along the banks, and they have very easy passage with the way that we design these. That's probably not at a flood flow because at those high flows, that culvert will be wet from edge to edge. But for most of the flows, most of the year, small mammals have an easy time moving through there.
Thank you so much, Mark. We will have experts answering the questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we cannot answer to everyone's question right now, but hopefully we can come back to some of them at the end of this webinar. Just to update everyone, this webinar is being recorded and the link will be available to everyone attending the event. Thank you so much, Mark. We now move with our webinar and now we will have Erica Borum from the US Forest Service. Erica builds technical capacity across national forest system lands and beyond by teaching the Forest Service stream simulation design methodology at road stream crossing. and infrastructure resilience. He resides in Colorado, USA, and has worked as an engineer for the U.S. Forest Service for over 17 years. He holds a pattern and has a great affinity for outdoors and loves science.
Hello, everyone. Please let me know if you can't hear me, but I assume you will, or you can.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So yes, thank you for the warm introduction. I will continue on the principles that Mark started with Forest Service stream simulation. So we know, as Mark talked about, the lid is not the most important. Getting the stream right is the most important. And there are many lids that can fit over a stream or a river once it has been restored. So principle 6, this idea of building a stream and then finding the appropriate lid to place over it. So what you're looking at here is an open bottom arch. It's sitting on buried concrete footings. And you'll notice the continuity of the stream into, through, and exiting the structure. This continuity is very important. We have another option that is a pipe arch, and this is an enclosed structure that is embedded into the stream, and then the stream bed and the banks are placed on that structure. Another option is a round pipe. That's another embedded structure, and this is another shape that can fit around the stream. Concrete box. We use concrete all the time. Concrete's another lid that can be used. And of course, we always have the option to span our channel with a bridge. In all of these cases, we're focused on matching the channel characteristics. So that's our goal of stream simulation. We are matching what the channel is telling us how it needs to be. So moving into resiliency concepts. The resiliency of a stream occurs by allowing a stream to behave as a stream without the road acting as a dam. So as Mark talked about, we have sediment, debris, animals. This allows that free movement into and through our crossing. Mark had mentioned what's good for the river is good for the road. And this is where we have spent the last 30 years learning this. We've made a lot of failures and we've learned a lot of lessons. So this is where the Forest Service stream simulation design has found that it also is flood resilient. So by matching the width, the gradient, or in other words, listening to what this stream is telling us, we have found that they're also flood resilient. And here's an example on the Green Mountain National Forest. This is up in the northeast of the United States in Vermont. This lower image you're looking at is some weather patterning from Tropical Storm Irene that occurred in August of 2011. This released 127 to 178 millimeters of rainfall. So that's like 5 to 7 inches. That's a significant amount of rain in 48 hours. This terrain is steep, mountainous. This resulted in tremendous runoff. This map up in the north, or up in the far right corner, is a similar event that happened just last year. So we're seeing these increased events occurring. This second storm, the intensity were near the same. And I want to focus on and highlight the yellow circle that's down at the lower part of this image. This is the area of the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont that we'll look at. So this event, Tropical Storm Irene, was categorized as a 100-year recurrence interval, or we commonly say a 500-year storm. In this event in 2011, many forest roads failed. Many were severely damaged, except where we had 3 different stream simulation structures. So in this example, you will notice that the stream bed, when you compare this image on the left, this was pre-storm. You'll notice that the bed is adjusted as we would expect in a large storm. However, the road remained intact and it remained passable to aquatic organisms. And then this is that image of the same structure on the upstream side, the inlet side, after that 2023 event that happened last July. So again, no damage to the road. So we're seeing the resilience of these floods. Another event or case study occurred in 2016 in northern Wisconsin on the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. So this flood event was estimated at, in this particular site of these pictures, 1.6 times the 500-year recurrence interval. So that's 1.6 times the 500-year storm. These floods that are becoming very hard to quantify. So this dropped 188 millimeters of rain, or over 7 inches, in just 6 hours. Torrential downpour. So for reference, this picture on the left, I did a dashed outline of what that original structure was prior to stream simulation replacement. So you can see just how undersized it was. So this, for reference, the photo on the left was 2009, before this flood occurred. And then you will notice after the flood, 2016, this photo on the right, again, you can see that the stream adjusted as we would expect, but we maintained passage and there was zero damage to the road infrastructure. So getting to principle 8, design with failure in mind. We are seeing these climate change events that have left us guessing when the next flood will occur and just how big will it be. So I will step through some ideas and to get at this previous question of how do we design with failure in mind. So here's a depiction of confluence of 2 tributaries. Down the right, this cartoon shows what happens when a road is installed crossing one of these tributaries and a culvert is blocked, diverting that stream down the road to where it eventually finds its way back. Water takes the path of least resistance, finding its way back into the channel, but with it, it's taking the earth in the form of landslides. So we've had single culverts on forest system lands that have caused millions of dollars in damage, where the road is diverted, created a landslide, diverted again, created more landslides, and the mountainside essentially just drips off the landscape in these large events. So this is a cartoon of what that looks like when the stream diverts down a road. Well, now this is the actual photo of what that may look like. We've got over 1 meter of road that's gullied. You can see a ditch relief culvert has become exposed. We want to avoid this stream diversion at our roads, and we also want to think about designing with failure in mind. So as we begin to learn to think like water, we can start thinking of what that designing with failure in mind looks like. Now, here we have a road at a crossing in a stream valley bottom that's relatively confined. So if this culvert were to plug, pretty easily the water would divert over the road and find its way back into the stream channel. Not ideal. We can remedy that with stream simulation with that 20% freeboard, allowing that capacity. But what we really want to avoid is the situations where we have a continuous grade and the culvert plugs. Where will the water go in this instance if we're not thinking about designing with failure in mind? So one easy solution is to put a dip in the road that allows the water to continue, travel over the road. We can armor that, we can reinforce that to ensure we're not losing the fill, and then the water simply returns back into the stream channel. So this is one way to think about designing with failure in mind and avoiding that diversion potential. So here's a cross section of a very wide valley bottom. This very wide floodplain, what we would do in this instance is we would use stream simulation to encapsulate the main channel of this stream, and then perhaps a road dip. So we have this very wide floodplain. Where will the water overtop? Where do we want it to overtop? So in a very large floodplain, large valley bottom, we would install a road dip. If necessary, what we can also do is install a flood relief culvert off in the floodplain margin and have additional water conveyance across this large floodplain. So now that we understand the concepts of stream simulation design, next question is, yeah, this is great, but what about the costs? Mark touched on this briefly. Can we afford these structures? And this brings us to principle number 9, the business case for resilience. So Mark showed this map to you. The increase in the heaviest precipitation with climate change. I want you to notice, take a focus on this 45 to 60% increase, this dark portion of the blue section up here. Now that 45-60% increase pretty much aligns with our Forest Service Region 9 area. You will notice on this map, these darker polygons, these are National Forest System lands and or grasslands. So this is the Region 9 Forest Service. We had a coworker tracking all of the floods that occurred between 2011 and 2018. These flood events that, due to climate change, we're seeing this increase. What was calculated and found was that our road system is not quite the resilience that we need. There was $63 million worth of replacement and repairs on forest system lands. So I want to highlight these 2 case study examples. Wisconsin, this is the Chequamegon-Nicolet on the far, far north of Wisconsin. And then we've got the Green Mountain National Forest down here in Vermont. So heading back to this case study example on the Chequamegon-Nicolet in northern Wisconsin. So this entire flood event across, so I talked about this particular being 1.6 times the 500-year recurrence interval. Well, in that whole area of the Chequamegon-Nicolet, it was estimated that the flooding, depending on the isolated events, was 1.1 to 10.5 times the 500-year recurrence interval. So these are just enormous events. What was found on the Chequamegon-Nicolet, they had 17 stream simulation structures installed. Of these 17 stream installation structures, 16 survived, and the road remained intact. Communities remained connected. So in these really, really big events that are just really becoming hard to comprehend, we have survivability of the road. And we always get back to, okay, well, what does this cost? So our best basis of analysis is to look at replacing in kind. Okay, so we have this 1.4 meter undersized structure. This was already replaced with stream simulation by the time the event occurred. But had the forest replaced this, 1.44 or less than 5 foot pipe arch with something similar, we found it would have been about $27,500. This is adjusted for 2020 US dollar pricing. Well, what was actually replaced was a 3.66 meter pipe arch countersunk, or a 12-foot wide pipe arch. That adjusted for 2020 costs was around $69,000. So This just so happens that increasing the width 2.5 times also increased the price 2.5 times. But as Mark mentioned, this is not the whole story. Similarly, I went through this exercise on an example in Colorado, looking at a structure being replaced that was grossly undersized. It was a 2.3 meter by 2 meter pipe arch, and we replaced that with a bottomless structure that was 5.9 meters. So this cost is nearly double. So again, not Forest Service policy, but I keep getting these questions of what are these costs? So I went through this exercise. For one, it does not meet our Forest Service policy or objectives. We know that they're dramatically undersized. We knew it was undersized at this site as the road overtopped. The culvert plugged, required a lot of maintenance. And so we have this short design life because we have material running across the bed of these structures. What we've found is, yes, the first cost may be higher, but it's not the whole story. We need to look at life cycle costs. So that brings us to our last topic of life cycle costs. But first, I want to touch on some research that has occurred on the Green Mountain National Forest during Tropical Storm Irene. They found that by increasing the size of those 3 undersized culverts to stream simulation, that was an increased installation cost of 9 to 22%. So I would argue that's, a minimal cost expense to ensure resilience. Bob Gubernick, one of our counterparts at the Forest Service, he did some statistical analysis and found that by increasing a structure with 50%, you increase the cost of installation 20 to 33%. So these economic analysis of stream simulation, we compare them at life zero, at year zero. But I've yet to see a true life cycle cost analysis of stream simulation where all of these different inputs are considered. So another report, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, I just want to point out this graph that they did their own independent study of stream simulation. And what they found is that conventional culverts over time, they are prone to failure, as we see again and again. Whereas stream simulation structures, that red line down at the bottom, they pretty much remain constant while these hydraulic culverts have this exponential increase in prone to failure. So I think you know where I'm going with this. Looking at this life cycle cost, Trout Unlimited also put together this graphic to show how stream simulation compares traditional culverts with a 25-year design life, including maintenance, how that compares with stream simulation. Well, you get to the minor flood, and yes, traditional culverts, they can handle some flooding. But when you start to look at extending the timeline out 50, 60, in some of our cases up in that northeast portion of the US, a lot less time, stream simulation ends up becoming cheaper. So we have these dividends are starting, we're seeing a return on investment when it comes to major floods. So I want to talk about this life cycle cost analysis and the inputs that actually go into these traditional culverts, these undersized culverts. So first cost, principle 10, do not tell the whole story. These year zero costs, comparing traditional culvert construction costs to stream simulation. It's comparing apples to oranges. So we have these numerous inputs for life cycle cost analysis. If you were to add up all of these inputs, you'll see how these flood events become very, very costly. And the first input being traffic safety. As Mark talked about, safety in the Forest Service is first and foremost, but we have so many miles of roads that we don't necessarily get to every mile prior to the public. So these are situations that we want to avoid, and we want to make our infrastructure more flood resilient. We have a lot of social costs input too. This picture is depicting loss of emergency services, property damage, loss of businesses in very fragile ecosystems that are poorly equipped to handle unexpected shocks to the supply chain. These floods can be devastating and catastrophic. Additional costs, we have loss of utilities such as power, water, communication. In some places, we have gas lines. Again, flooding is a really big deal with climate change. Another social cost, road closures, delays, loss of access, emergency access, fire access, recreation access. So these social costs are really starting to add up. Input 3, recurring maintenance costs. This includes clearing out the pipes. This includes clearing debris in and around a crossing, repairing erosion, resurfacing a road. So these recurring maintenance that occur even in these smaller floods for traditional culverts start inching the cost up. Input 4, recurring replacement costs. In flood-prone areas, such as that northeast, traditional culverts require more frequent replacement. And I want to draw attention to, in case you didn't know, this gentleman standing here in the right corner of this photo. That's a big structure, meaning this event in Vermont was a big event. So it's just a testament to stream simulation and the resilience of it. Input 5, these include very hefty expenses for emergency repairs and replacement. The immediacy of an emergency means our costs go up. So every time there is a flood, there is an emergency. Increased costs. Input 6, loss of water quality and or increased cost of water treatment for municipal systems. You can see in this picture, many cubic meters of material have been lost with this road failure, which means that material is ending up downstream, requiring additional treatment. So, although in zero of the literature on the economic benefits of stream simulation, not one of them has covered input 7, which is natural capital. And if you're not familiar with natural capital, that is simply the world's stock of natural assets such as geology, soil, water, air, and all living things. And I want to just highlight, so Colorado is that dark box in the middle. That's where I live. You can notice again the polygons of those green areas are National Forest System lands. So there are a lot of national forests in Western Colorado. But I want to point out that in Colorado, and that's just one state of 50, natural capital directly relates to direct capital. The outdoor recreation industry in 2023, last year, contributed almost 66 billion, that's with a B, dollars to the Colorado economy. So natural capital is a very important input. And being that we're talking about aquatic passage, we are sponsored by World Fish Migration Foundation. I wanted to point out that of that $66 billion of natural capital input into Colorado last year, about $2.5 billion was directly attributed to fishing and angler activities. So this is a big deal across the country, across the world. So I would like to summarize the dividends of stream simulation. So a return on investment, it not only includes these ecological and geomorphic connectivity, flood resilience, low to no maintenance costs, long lifespan. In the end, they do have a cheaper life cycle costs. So now that we know better, we are trying to correct our mistakes of the past. And I just wanted to point out, so the Forest Service has been at this for a while. We have these two references, the stream simulation guide that goes through the approach of providing aquatic organism passage. And then what we talked on a lot with flood resilience and flooding with climate change, this water road interaction technology series is very helpful for anyone who may be interested in more information. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Erica. We have a lot of questions in the Q&A. Celine is asking, why are metal structures used instead of concrete in the US? We see very little metal structures where I am. Is there a reason why?
I believe the reason we use a lot of metal is because it is commercially available and they come in so many different sizes. And commercial availability is one reason why we use so much metal. In some countries, concrete is the predominant material source, and so that is what is used. It comes down to commercial availability. There's a demand in the US, so then there's a market to provide that.
Thank you. A question from Richard. Could you elaborate a little more on how you take the overland case into consideration when designing a culvert? Do you design the roads on top of the culvert to have the section where which could handle extra overland flow without causing damage to the structure?
Correct, yes. So one way to do that is to provide that dip in the road that can be armored. What we want to do is we want to try to create the elevation of that dip to be lower than the inlet of our culvert. So as Mark mentioned, we never want to pressurize our flow. That increases velocity, increases scour. So if we can, in these very large valley bottoms, there tends to be a lot of water storage. So the velocities tend to be low anyway. So if we can spread out the flow and allow for all that overland to eventually get across the road, that's the ideal scenario. These wide valley bottoms tend to have large structures, which tend to be expensive. So the first question we always ask is the road needed? And if the road is needed, we ask the second question, maybe we can move the road to a better location where we're not crossing in such a wide floodplain.
Thank you. Another question from Tiago Couto. Thank you, Mark and Erica, for sharing your experience. I was wondering if you are aware of funding and training opportunities to implement culvert replacement projects in countries of the global south.
I am not aware of any right now. Mark, myself, and Dan Cinderelli, who I believe is on the chat handling questions, we teach this course in the US. We have not, we are a team of 3, so we have limited capacity, but we would love to make this information available. And that stream simulation guide is a good place to start.
Thank you. I think we have time for a final one. This one from Scott Blair, works for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. One of the biggest challenges we face is dealing with engineers is because of the cost of fish-friendly culverts design versus CSP. What are the best low-cost CSP culverts designs for improving fish passage?
So stream simulation we found are most cost effective. Yes, what we have found is training engineers out of the old methodology and then providing these life cycle cost analysis are really helpful. We can provide additional papers, research that I pulled a lot of this information from. So the information is out there. I think we are slowly, this paradigm shift of shifting the first cost is not the cheapest cost. Looking at life cycle analysis is very important.
Okay, thank you, Erica. And I would like to thank the team from the U.S. Forest Service for this knowledge shared with our attendees. We will move ahead with the webinar, and now I will invite Sofia. Sofia is an ecologist working for the country administrative board of the Norrbotten in Sweden. She is a project manager of a life project, Trivia Life, and this is her third life project managed. Sofia, you have the floor. You are muted, Sofia. Please unmute yourself.
So thank you for the introduction. I will share my screen. Let's see. Sorry, I did it wrong. I'm not used to Zoom. Here we go. Do you see my presentation now?
Yes.
And you hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, so I will start from the beginning. Okay, thank you. My name is Sofia Perä. I work at the County Administrative Board of Norrbotten. It's the county the furthest north in Sweden. And I'm the project manager for Trivia Life. And I will talk a little bit about our project area, which is the Torne River, and also about the problems we have here and some solutions. So TRIVA stands for Torne River International Watershed, and the project area of TRIVA is the entire watershed of Torne River. So, and it's about the same size as Switzerland, so it's really big. And the river is the border river between Finland and Sweden. But for people living in this area, it's less of a border and more of a road that connects people. And we are in the northernest part of Finland and Sweden. The Arctic Circle crosses our project area. And the Torne River is together with the interconnected Kalix River, the watershed is the only near pristine large river system left in the Baltic Sea region. The river produces about half of all the wild salmon that swims in the Baltic Sea. And it is the spawning and nursery area for migratory whitefish, sea trout, and lamprey. The river is free flowing and with no hydropower dams in the main river. It has no big falls, and because of that, salmon can migrate from the sea up to the mountain area. And this is unique for the Torne River. The Torne River is protected by law, and it is a Natura 2000 site, and therefore protected by the European Union. And the budget of TRIVA is 21 million euros, and 60% comes from EU, from the LIFE program. So the project started last year and will continue until 2030. We are 9 partners in the project. We have Finnish partners and Swedish partners. So we have Metsähallitus in Finland and Metsäkeskus. They're mainly working with forest. We have the Center for Economic Development, Transport and Environment in Finland, and also the Natural Resources Institute and the University of Umeå. And in Sweden, we have Sveaskog, which is a big forest owner, the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, Luleå University of Technology, and the County Administrative Board. And we are the coordinating beneficiary. So you might think that the northern part of Sweden and Finland is untouched and wild, but that is simply not true. Forests, water, and wetlands are very much affected by human activities. We have straightened streams, ditched wetlands, and built migration barriers such as culverts and dams. And I will talk a little bit about some of the other action besides migration barriers, but I will be short. we work a little bit with the damage done by timber floating. And we will restore about 96 kilometers of streams in the project. Forestry has been and is an important industry in the northern part of Sweden and Finland. The timber is cut down in the inlands and transported to the coast where the industries are. And before there were roads, they used streams to transport the timber. And they use streams as small as 2 meters in width for timber floating. But in the beginning, the streams didn't look the way they do now. There were a lot of boulders and side channels, and the timber got stuck. And that was a financial loss, as well as a dangerous working environment. So they started to modify the streams to facilitate the timber floating. They straightened the streams, they cut up side channels, they remove boulders and stones. And this is, of course, a habitat loss for the plants and animals living in the stream, but also in the water velocity increased. And they all usually built like barriers between the terrestrial area and the water area in the shoreline. So there's no exchange between them, and that is a very important area for animals and plants. So what we do now is that we are restoring rivers by putting back big boulders and stones. And we do large structures. We use excavators. And we also do deep pools for larger fish. We open up side channels, and we do a very important thing, and that is creating spawning beds. But we also do some manual measures. We do spawning beds with special tools called, we have a method called Hattijoki method. It is developed here in the northern part of Sweden. And so far, we have only had one field season. We have done 8.7 kilometers of streams, and you can see here a before and after picture. This is a small stream called Amajoki in Sweden, and as you can see in the after picture, there's a lot more structures in the water, and we open up small side channels. But our second part of the project is to restore wetlands, and we will restore about 2,500 hectares of wetlands in the Torne River Valley. To gain more agriculture and forest land, wetlands were ditched. The ditching started slowly in the 19th century, and in the 20th century, the machines made the work easier and a lot faster. More than half of all the wetlands in Finland and Sweden are ditched, and an estimation shows that on 25% of the ditched wetlands, the forest is not growing, so the purpose of the ditches was not achieved. So what we do now is we fill the ditches with peat, and we use excavators mainly, but sometimes we do it manually, and we do it with timber and peat. Wetlands capability to store water is better after restoration. Even in hot summers, the streams close to the wetland do not dry out. And so far in Triva, we have done 224 hectares of wetlands. And here's a picture from the Finnish side where Metsähallitus have done measures. You can see 5 different ditches that I have filled with peat. And now to the main story of my presentation, the migration barriers. Our goal in Triva is to remove 399 migration barriers. And if we look at the map, there's about 6,000 road water crossings in the Torne River Valley, and about a third of them are migration barriers. But we also have a lot of dams, about 200. They're not hydropower dams. They're dams built for timber floating, private fish ponds, fish farming, or just to regulate water levels. And when we work, we always try to do all the migration barriers in the same stream, because if we remove one upstream and there's still a barrier downstream, the fish that migrates from the sea will not come to the spawning areas. So for larger streams, we're usually replacing culverts with bridges. This is a good solution, but it is expensive. But we also replace culverts with arches that keep a natural riverbed. And now I have a small film. I hope you can see it. It is made by Metsähallitus, our partner in Finland. So this is a culvert that have been changed to a bigger culvert with natural materials inside. Okay. In some cases, we also do measures without changing the culvert. By making thresholds downstream, the water level will rise and remove the drop at the outlet. But we also add a substrate into the culvert to slow down the water velocity. And we remove a lot of dams. We have removed different types of dams, for instance, timber floating dams like the one on the top, and smaller fish net that there are migration barriers. But we also have two really big measures, and one of them is done this summer. We have 2 hydropower dams in a tributary in a stream called Tenglionjoki on the Finnish side. And we have built one bypass past one hydropower dam, and we will build the next one next year. And the bypasses open up more than 970 kilometers of river continuum upwards from the hydropower dams. So I have a small film that shows how it looks like, and you can see the hydropower dam on the right and the bypass on the left in the film. So far we have removed 102 migration barriers. And I also want to add that besides the measures we're doing within the project, the Swedish Transport Administration will do some measures inside the project area for the public roads. And they have a budget of 18 million euros. And they have removed 24 culverts so far, and will do 11 more. And these are much more expensive since it's on public roads. So we're on socials. You can follow us on Facebook. We are called Triva Life, and there you can see what we're doing. And this is the last picture. It's the picture of our target species: salmon, green dragonfly. No, green. Yeah, it's a green dragonfly. Otter, freshwater pearl mussel, and bullhead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. We have some questions in the Q&A. One of them is from Stefan Will. What about social acceptability for dam removing in Sweden, especially concerning hydraulic power? And he continued with what answers you provide.
I don't do that kind of work. I don't work with removing hydropower dams. But we have this work, national work that's going on. We had to, all the hydropower dams need to have new permits. But I can't answer anything about removal of those dams.
Thank you, Sophia. Another question, anonymous. Are you monitoring the biologic response to all this work?
Yes, we are. I didn't add it to the presentation because it's so much. It would take a lot of time, but we do electrofishing. We have fish counters. We do eDNA tests. We have also collected otter droppings to do DNA analysis to see the individuals in the area. We have collected 2,000 samples last year. We do a lot of benthic fauna, how the hydrology and the structure is before and after, and the water velocity. So we do a lot of things. We have 2 universities working in the project.
Thank you. Another question from Celine. What about sediment release? Is that something you don't take into account in the work phase? We have to deviate water in only work in summer dry months to avoid impact on Nature 2000 species and or protected species.
It is a problem, and we do take it into account. The action that releases most sediments is the river restoration. But since we have such short period of time when we can do the actual work, we can't limit it to a certain time. So we have to work when we can. But we are doing a lot to prevent sedimentation from wetlands coming out. We do a lot of plugging from ditches that comes from wetlands close to the stream to prevent sediments. So.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. You mentioned this is one from Olivia Gray. You mentioned digging deep pools in channels for large fish. How do you prevent those pools from infilling over time, or does it require constant maintenance, dredging?
No, it doesn't. You need to dig them the right way. You have to dig them like a spoon, so and make the water velocity go, make the water stream like past the pools in the right way. And the people working with this, they're really skilled, so they know exactly how to do it. We have done this work for many years.
Thank you, Sophia. We will move on with our speakers. The next one is Nicolas. Nicolas Mayon is a biologist at the Nature Park Haute-Sûre Forêt de. He is in charge of catchment partnership and works on various rivers restoration projects, such as reestablishing ecological continuity and renaturalization. Nicolas, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hope everybody can hear me well. I'm going to share my screen. Is that okay?
Yes.
So really happy to be here with you today and to share experience of restoration work we carried out this summer. So this is really fresh news you're gonna hear about. So just maybe a few words on who we are and where we're from. We are Nature Park Haute-Sûre Forêt located in Belgium, southeast Belgium, just next to the border with Luxembourg. And the area I'm gonna focus about today is the southern part of the nature park, which is the Allier forest. You can see there. And for those who can read French, here on the text, it's one of the biggest forests in Belgium, actually. And if I can, start the Google Earth animation. Here is where we are. This is Europe. This is Belgium. And now you got the Allier forest. And the reason why we work there is because of one species, which is the freshwater pearl mussel. That species is living both sides of the Atlantic. So you can find it in Europe, you can find it also in North America. It's a globally endangered species, and even at the European scale, it's even critically endangered species. So we have big environmental issue here with this freshwater pearl mussel, because in the Allier forest, the last pearl mussels of Belgium are living there, actually. So this is really a big issue for us. And the link between Culvert, which is the topic of the webinar, and the pearl mussel is brown trout, because freshwater pearl mussels have a very special reproductive cycle during which the larvae, which we call glochidia, have to fix onto the gills of a host fish, which in our case is brown trout. So to make good pearl mussel conservation, you have to maximize the probability of encounter between the freshwater pearl mussel larvae and the host fish. So you need really optimal brown trout populations. And that was not the case in the streams in the forest, because Fish Survey told us that we were not at optimal levels. And we linked that to fragmentation issues. We carried out fish passability assessment using the ICE protocol. Some of you might know it's a French and Belgian methodology to assess fish passage. And it shows that we have high fragmentation issues, mainly on tributaries that are mainly disconnected from the mainstream. And those tributaries are high quality spawning ground for brown trout. So that was really an issue for us. And no surprise, most of the barrier we found were culverts on forest tracks. And we wanted to replace them because retrofit and buffers was not a solution for us, because we wanted to achieve a high level of river restoration, but also all those culverts, pipe culverts and box culverts, were undersized. So it was not a good idea to put buffers on it. We're in forest, so there is wood, there is debris, and we don't want to have plug culverts and pipes. So we wanted to replace them totally. So that's why we went to this technique solution of small precast concrete modular bridges, and that you can see here. And the simplest way to explain it to you is just to show you this picture. I'm not sure I can quote a trademark here, but the picture, I'm sure everybody knows what it is. And basically, the technique works exactly the same. The bricks are a bit larger and unfortunately not much colorful, but it's exactly the same principle. I have prepared a short video. I hope it's gonna work, or if it doesn't work, I can shift on another slide with just pictures. So this is one of the culverts we worked on, and it was major barrier. So prior to the work, we choose to divert the stream and pump up the culvert area dry to avoid mud flush into permafrost population, so it's really protected to avoid sediment. Then we proceed to the removal of the old culvert, some excavation work to install the new bridge, a leveling bed of gravel to lay the abutments, and then we start building the bridge brick by brick. The first brick takes a little more time, but once the first brick is set, everything goes really fast. It's really easy. And it's dry assembly. There's no concrete, no mortar, so it limits the risk of environmental pollution. And in between the two abutments, we bring riverbed material to make a new riverbed. Then we come with the deck, remove the cofferdam, and open up the river again. And so it's done. So you see, it's really fast, actually, really easy and really fast. And it has a lot of advantages. The first advantage is it's that technique is designed for forestry equipment. So it accepts heavy loads, loaded logging trucks and forestry equipment. It's not designed for regular roads, but for forest tracks. So low traffic level and low speed, it's okay. Another advantage is that I told it's totally dry assembly, no mortar, no cement. So when you have to work in areas with high environmental issues, it's really safe. And also one advantage is that it's really adaptable to site geometry. Using the same elements, you can build whatever bridge you want. We have made really small bridges and we have made bigger ones. As you can see on the picture, the guy with the orange t-shirt is the same guy, but obviously the bridge is not the same bridge. As you can see, you can adapt with longer span to the bridge. It's really easy and you can adapt to some constraint. You can, when you have to dig deeper to find a hard basis, you can just adapt by bringing more bricks. And one thing is also that is also great is that these are all small individual elements. So that's really easy to handle in constrained environment like in forest where you got trees everywhere and it's also protected forest, so you don't have to cut all the trees. It's really easy to handle those small bricks in really constrained places. And also, yeah, one obvious advantage is that it allows full riverbed restoration. It's no box. So between the two abutments, you got natural riverbed that is made again. So this is a stimulation we did, simulation we did. Actually bringing some natural riverbed composition and geometry. We restored sediment transport and restore hyporheic processes. And you find also some hydromorphological plasticity. The stream can self-adjust under the new bridge. And of course, here a new video. It allows fish passage. This is a brown trout that I filmed just upstream of a newly built bridge where previously that was an impassable culvert. So it's great to see now fish can cross the road. We made 11 culvert replacement in the forest this summer, and this allowed to reopen 28 kilometers of streams and brooks that are really high quality spawning grounds for brown trout. So we expect now in the coming years to see some recovery of the brown trout populations and eventually freshwater pearl mussels. I got a last slide about budget information because these are questions that I'm often asked, and it's really difficult to answer that question actually because the cost per site is highly variable. And it's not because of the associated work like earthwork or backfilling or culvert removal. What really changes is the precast modular bridge actually, and it depends on the geometry of the bridge. It's the same as those Lego games. If you ask me what's the cost of a Lego game, I would say it depends. You got small Lego race cars and you got huge Lego spaceships, and the price is not the same. And it's the same here for the bridges. We made really small bridges and we make bigger bridges. And of course, the price depends on geometry, so it's really hard to tell about the cost. But you can see about the range of the cost for the budget. And I guess this is a place where I have to thank our co-founders, which is the Wallonia government and the former Minister of Environment, and also the Open Rivers program, which we applied to and got a grant. So I'm done. Thank you for your attention, and I don't know if you have questions about this work.
Thank you, Nicola. We have two questions again in the Q&A. What is the maximum bridge span? Have these models bridge face any high flow?
The maximum span of those bridges we use is 2 meters. So it's really for small streams and brooks and creeks. And we did not use that on bigger streams, actually. So for the streams we worked on, it's no problem. We are more than 1.2 times the bank full width. So it's okay. It's okay for the flood. But yeah, we didn't try this technique on bigger streams.
Thank you. Another question is, how resilient do you think that the design of the precast modular bridge structure in environment with frost checking?
I have no idea. I really have no idea. We have no insight for this technique. This is a first in Belgium. So I don't really know. It was pilot, it was test. And so I guess you will have to ask me the same question in 100 years, and I will tell you.
Thank you. If you are there in 100 years.
Yeah.
What is the anticipated lifespan for these brick bridges? And how easy it will be carry out any future repairs?
Again, I don't know. Same answer. This really is a test, so we don't really know. We don't really know.
Thank you. A question from Julie. Did you need any water or environmental regulatory file according to the law to intervene in the river that you dried for the works?
Yeah, there are two authorization process that we have to make in Belgium. It's not the same as in France, actually. But yeah, and we had a lot of discussions with state service and so on. But the fact that the coffer dam and the pumping and drying up the river stretch is is their imposition. I would say that they ask for it. It's really because we are working on those rivers where permafrosts are, so we could not afford any mud flush or sediment flush into the river. Yeah.
Thank you. Another anonymous question: Is the modular bridge available in North America? Do you know?
I have no idea. What I know is that this system is patented by a French manufacturer, and we had to buy this from them. It was not that far away from us, fortunately, so we can use them in Belgium, but I have no idea for North America. And even for other countries in Belgium, I have no idea.
Thank you, Nicola. I think we have time for a final question. Is the functionality and lifespan of these modular bridges comparable to, for example, stream simulation construction?
Well, again, difficult to say because we have no end sight for this restoration work, and it's also like Celine asked at the beginning of the webinar. We are not that used to steel structure here in Belgium, so it's a lot of concrete stuff we use. So I don't really know about the lifespan. I think for the functionality we are good because these are really small stream we worked on, and so it's kind of stream simulation that we carried out under the deck of the bridge. Actually, it's the natural width of the stream, it's the natural slope, it's the natural riverbed material. So on that aspect, I guess we made some kind of stream simulation.
Thank you, Nicola. I think we can continue, and we will reach out to our final speaker. Magda Jentgena is a water program manager at the WWF Latvia. She has been active in dam removal for the past 5 years and is in the way to reach the Latvian national target in the free-flowing rivers in the few months. And also has removed the first dam in her country. Welcome, Magda. We will have a conversation. I don't think we have a presentation. Magda, in our last discussion, during the live interview that we organized, you briefly mentioned culvert replacement projects you were working on. Could you briefly explain these projects and what was the main reason for this replacement?
Hi, Ruben. Yes, thank you for having me, first of all. And yeah, we have a few culvert projects in Latvia. Some have been completed and some we're still working on. The very first one that we did back in 2022 was a small culvert replacement project in the Gauja River Basin. So a lot of our culverts actually look exactly like the one that's on our background. So we have these old cement Soviet culverts, which are way too small for our streams and our migration barriers. So this is the one we're seeing right now is the one we replaced back in 2022. As you can see, it's obviously not passable. And this is a different one, but this sort of generally shows the scene in Latvia. And the one we replaced was actually it was more of a communications tool, but it freed up 4 kilometers of this small stream. And we replaced it with this plastic culvert. The reason why this was an interesting project was because actually we started a partnership with a company that produces these culverts. We reached out to the company we were going to buy them from, Viacon, and this was actually an idea that came from our contractor. He said, when we were working on this project, he said, why don't we try and see if we can sort of develop a partnership with the company? And we reached out to them and they said, yeah, they would be more than happy to actually donate the culvert to us free of charge. And then we went a step further. What we did was we tried to integrate circular economy principles in this project. And they actually gave us 2 leftover pieces, which were from some of their other projects. And we could combine the 2 pieces together and create this culvert, which was no longer a barrier on the river, on the stream. So this was, I think, a really interesting way to approach the issue. And of course, it lowered the budget quite significantly for us. So this was sort of our first trial with culvert replacements, because it's not yet that common in Latvia. And we were looking for a low-hanging fruit. And in our case, we see culverts exactly as this. It's much easier to remove them and reconstruct them compared to other types of dams or barriers. And after that, we got interested in culverts in general. And then we figured out that while we have a lot of them in Latvia, we don't always know exactly where they are. Obviously, not all of them are migration barriers. Not all of them have to be replaced at the moment. And then we wanted to know which ones are more ecologically significant barriers. So we did a river basin mapping project using GIS satellite data, using LIDAR data to find the problematic culverts in an entire basin in Latvia, one of the 4 major basins. So we used LIDAR data to map all the culverts and then try to find the problematic ones. And we came up with a list of top 20 culverts that could and should be removed. And now in a project that we have ongoing at the moment, we are going to replace 2 of the top 20 that we mapped in the previous project.
Perfect. Thank you, Magda. So you mentioned this collaboration with the company. What other organizations that were partnering in this project to remove or replace the culvert?
So we are mostly, it's us, the contractor that we work with, and then we have scientific partners, apart from, of course, the company that makes the culverts. So we don't see the need necessarily to have more partners than this, but of course we are strongly engaging with the municipalities, because a lot of these culverts, essentially there's 2 owners mostly for these culverts. It's either under the municipal roads or it's under the national state authority, for road authority. So those are the 2 big stakeholders for these projects that we need to work with, but they're not always partners.
There is any difference between stakeholder engagement in this kind of project and other kind of barrier removal?
Huge. The reason that we see these culverts as low-hanging fruits is because normally nobody has an objection to their removal. They are not really connected to any sort of swimming places, and a lot of them are actually on the small streams in the forests, so there isn't really a lot of societal use for them. So we don't get a lot of opposition like we do with other types of dams. And everyone is quite interested that they actually do get replaced.
Perfect, thank you. And in terms of obtaining permits, is there more or less demanding regarding other barriers removal?
In terms of permitting, it's actually quite similar to smaller dam removal. Of course, we're not talking about the big dam removals, which would need environmental impact assessments. But these small culvert removals and small dam removals require something that we call technical rules, or technical rules essentially. So we need to get the permits from the state environmental service. They will sort of evaluate each case and they'll ask for the scientific monitoring of, fish species, the ecosystem. It's not that difficult, but it's obviously not simply just going into the river and starting the work.
Thank you. And what other species besides fish are considered in such project?
We are considering essentially any live species which are, using the river, because we want to make the river or the stream usable and passable for everyone, all organisms living in the river. So it, like mentioned in the previous presentations, we essentially don't want the culvert to affect the stream continuity at all. It should be as though the culvert is not there. So that's what we try to consider. We can't just make it passable or usable for salmonid species, for example. We need to take into consideration lampreys and crayfish and other species. The one that we don't focus that much on is mammals, because they are using the roads. They're not really using the culverts as much. As I mentioned, a lot of these are in the middle of the forest. There's really not really a lot of car traffic, so the animals do not have an issue using the roads.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell us a bit more about the other replacement projects that you have in the pipeline?
Yeah, so the one that we're working on right now, we were going to replace 2 culverts in, well, we actually wanted to do it this fall, but we have postponed it until early next year, because by the time we got the permits, the salmonoid migration period had started, and we had decided not to remove them during the migration period, even though the culverts were in a state of emergency. Because they're in such bad shape, we could be working on it right now, but we have chosen not to. We'll wait until January to start working on those. So we are going to be replacing 2 of these old culverts on the same river. So the river, which is about 18 kilometers long, will be free flowing once we remove those, and it has direct connectivity to the sea. So they are ecologically quite significant, and one of them is on a municipal road, and the other one's on the National Road Authority road. So we have both of the key stakeholders involved, and that is sort of what we are trying to do with our projects. Obviously, we are not trying to replace, reconstruct all of the culverts in the country. We have about 60,000 culverts, and about 30,000 could be problematic in Latvia. What we are trying to do is sort of create these demonstration projects, show that it can be done, how it should be done, and get the National Road Authority and the municipalities to invest in culvert replacements and reconstruct them in the future.
Thank you. I have 2 more questions. One of them is, how do you fund these projects? Who is funding this kind of project in Latvia?
At the moment, the one we're working on is funded by Open Rivers program. And the first one that we did was funded by the Swedish Postcode Foundation, but that was not meant to be a culvert replacement project. As I mentioned, it was a communications activity. So we actually used the communications budget from that project to replace the culvert. The costs ended up being around 15,000 euros for the entire replacement. So it was very affordable, but currently we have the Open Rivers program funding this work.
Thank you. And finally, what are the lessons learned in this specific culverts replacement project?
One of the key lessons is that it's very doable. We should not be afraid to take these projects on, because we can get the positive results quite quickly, and they can be as great examples, and that we don't always need to take the biggest, most difficult dams to remove and spend many years fighting for those. Of course, we need that as well, but we can also focus on these low-hanging fruits, which are very often these small road culverts.
Thank you. We have a few questions in the Q&A. One of them is from Russell. Magda, have there been any follow-up evaluation of the removal of Perä Dam?
Yes, we did monitoring of the Perä Dam after the removal. We have already seen some trout migrating up, But of course, we're not, since it was completed only this summer, we don't have any more results. We just know that trout can get up the dam, so previous dam, so they are going up and spawning there.
Thank you. And a question from Kath, have any structure been put in which have ledge or similar for mammals to get through, rather than them having to use the roads to cross and risk getting killed?
No, the projects that we have done and that are being done by the National Road Authority, they are not putting in these ledges for mammals to cross. Again, as I mentioned, we are not really having mammals killed on these forested roads, so they are not putting these ledges in.
Thank you. And the final question from Chris, what species benefit from your projects? I think you already responded to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the migrating fish primarily. Those are the ones that we are focusing on. It's the two primary species that we focus on is the salmonoid species, so trout, salmon, so on, and lampreys. Those are the two key species that we very often have in our rivers and that we want to prioritize.
Thank you so much, Magda. I think we have time for a few more questions to other speakers as well. I've seen some in the Q&A, one from Thomas, and I think that this one is from Nicolas. How much of a screw to the road center line can the system accommodate?
Yeah, I was just answering this question actually. So you can accommodate any angle possible. There are two possibilities for small streams. Whether you make a longer bridge with the angle, whether you just work on the stream bed to make it cross the road at 90 degrees. We choose not to modify the streams. So in our case, when the stream was crossing the road and at another angle than 90 degrees, we choose to make just a longer bridge to cover all the road. We had also cases where the stream was and the road were crossing in a bend, so we had to make also the bridge a little longer. So that's something you can handle with those modular system.
Thank you, Nicola. A question from Mia, question for the end. We have many culverts in the UK that run under old towns, and redesigning is very restrict due to the surrounding infrastructure. Do you have any methods to improve small restricted and long culverts such as lightning? And when the culvert cannot be redesigned? This is an open question, and one of our speakers could respond to this. Maybe Mark, could you respond to this question?
Could you repeat the question?
It's a question from Mia. We have many culverts in the UK that run under old towns, and redesign is very restricted due to the surrounding infrastructure. What are the methods to improve small restricted and long culverts such as lightning?
Yeah, Mia, that's a tough one, because when you get infrastructure like that that's been built over the top of with residential or development or whatever else, you're kind of stuck. And so if that development is not moved out of place, you're basically left what you have, and you have to do something to try to get beneficial depths and velocities inside of that, which looks like a retrofit. And the problem with that would be, as was pointed out earlier, you don't have excess capacity there. So I think what you end up doing is making the best of a bad situation until the time comes where the whole system has to be pulled out and replaced because it's literally failed. But that's where slip lining and things like that come into play as possible solutions to maintain your flood conveyance, but it's a difficult one for passage. And I think part of that question too was about lighting. And there's been a couple different questions about, do you need to provide light inside of these structures because a long culvert gets very dark, and is that problematic? And I think that is species dependent. I'm sure it is, but at least in the United States, we have had requirements to provide lighting, for example, every 75 feet, where we had to have some standpipe come up so light could come in. Then some clever biologists figured out that our fish species move at night. And so we've actually moved away from that requirement of having to provide natural light.
Thank you, Mark. A question from Garrett. This is a question targeted to all speakers. Have you conducted a construction or a culvert replacement in a highly urbanized system? If so, any tips or insights on the challenges you may have faced where low water crossing are utilized as walking or hiking trails?
Well, it sounds like two different questions. And in the urbanized setting, I think what we just talked about is ultimately applicable there. We get that question a lot about stream simulation. When you're in an urbanized setting, how do you find a reference reach? Well, the idea is you're looking for a reach of a stream channel that is in some sort of steady state or equilibrium in that system, and you can still use it as a reference. It's not going to be pristine, but working in an urban environment, the principles of a stream still apply. You're just challenged a lot by infrastructure around it. So you can't get away from that. You're going to deal with utilities, buildings, other roads. The flip side of that question around low water crossings is, yes, we don't have to have a culvert or a pipe at every road crossing, and we will use a low water crossing, we call it a ford, up in watersheds where the flows are low, the traffic is low, and we don't have concerns with water quality and perhaps migration barriers. So we have a whole publication within the Forest Service about low water crossings. So if people wanted to do a Google search on US Forest Service low water crossings, you'll find a publication that addresses that.
Thank you so much, Mark. I have a final question, and this one is for the European projects. What are planning process that have been engaged in these European projects? Culvert replacement in Belgium, culvert replacement in Latvia, stream works in Sweden. Are both appropriate assessment and ecological impact assessment typically undertaken in order to get planning permission?
Maybe I can answer. Yes, there's a lot of permits we need to have to do this kind of work, and it depends on how big the measure is. So for the culverts, we have to permit from the county, and since I'm working at the county, it needs to be done by another county. And for the river restoration, we need permits from the environmental court. So there's a lot of work before we can do anything, especially from the environmental court. It can take up to 2 years to get permits.
Thank you, Sofia. I think we've reached the end of our webinar. I would like to thank everyone for attending this great event. I would also like to thank to all our speakers, Mark, Nicolas, Erica, Sofia, and Magda. On behalf of the World Fish Migration Foundation and the US Forest Service, I would like to thank everyone for your participation, and we will be in touch sending you the link for this webinar. Thank you so much, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.